way up there. Okay, we are reading Because of Winn-Dixie. We are on chapter 3, which is page 20. Goodness. I started in on Winn-Dixie right away, trying to clean him up. First, I gave him a bath. I used the garden hose and some baby shampoo. He stood still for it, but I could tell he didn't like it. He looked insulted, and the whole time he didn't show me his teeth or wag his tail once. After he was all washed and dry, I brushed him good. I used my own hair brush and worked real hard at all the knots and the patches that first stuck together. He didn't mind being brushed. He wiggled his back like it felt pretty good. The whole time I was working on him, I was talking to him, and he listened. I told him how we were alike. See, I said, you don't have any family, and neither do I. I've got the preacher, of course, but I don't have a mama. I have one, but I don't know where she is. She left when I was 3 years old, and I can hardly remember her. And I bet you don't remember your mom either. So we're almost like orphans. Winn-Dixie looked straight at me when I said that to him, like he was feeling relieved to finally have somebody understand the situation. I nodded my head at him and went on talking. I don't even have friends, because I had to leave them all behind when we moved here from Watley. Watley's up in northern Florida. Have you ever been to North Florida? Winn-Dixie looked at the ground like he was trying to remember if he had. You know what, I said? Ever since we moved here, I've been thinking about my mama extra hard, more than I ever did when I was in Watley. Winn-Dixie twitched his ears and raised his eyebrows. I think the preacher thinks that about my mama all the time, too. He's still in love with her. I know that because I heard the ladies at church in Watley talking about him. They say he's still hoping she'll come back. But he doesn't tell me that. He won't talk about her at all. He won't. I want to know more about her, but I'm afraid to ask the preacher. I'm afraid he'll get mad at me. Winn-Dixie looked hard at me, like he was trying to say something. What? I said. He just stared at me. You think I should make the preacher tell me about her? Winn-Dixie looked at me so hard he sneezed. I'll think about it, I said. When I was done working on him, Winn-Dixie looked a whole lot better. He still had his bald spots, but the fur he did have cleaned up nice. It was all shiny and soft. You could still see his ribs, but I intended to feed him good, and that would take care of that. I couldn't do anything about his crooked yellow teeth because he got into a sneezing fit every time I tried brushing them with my toothbrush, and finally I had to give up. But for the most part, he looked a whole lot better, and so I took him into the trailer and showed him to the preacher. Daddy, I said. He said. He was working on a sermon and kind of muttering to himself. Daddy, I wanted to show you the new Winn-Dixie. The preacher put down his pencil and rubbed his nose and finally looked up. Well, he said, smiling real big at Winn-Dixie. Well, now don't you look handsome? Winn-Dixie smiled back at the preacher. He went over and put his head in the preacher's lap. He smells nice too, said the preacher. He rubbed Winn-Dixie's head and looked into his eyes. Daddy, I said real quick before I lost all my nerve, I've been talking to Winn-Dixie. Is that right? The preacher said, and he scratched Winn-Dixie's head. I've been talking to him, and he agreed with me that since I'm 10 years old, you should tell me 10 things about my mama. Just 10 things, that's all. The preacher stopped rubbing Winn-Dixie's head and held real still. I could see him thinking about pulling his head into his shell. 1 thing for each year I've been alive, I told him. Please. Winn-Dixie looked up at the preacher and kind of gave him a nudge with his nose. The preacher sighed. He said to Winn-Dixie, I should have guessed you were going to be trouble. And then he looked at me. Come on, Opal, he said. Sit down, and I will tell you 10 things about your mama. Chapter 4. 1, said the preacher. We were sitting on the couch, and Winn-Dixie was sitting between us. Winn-Dixie had already decided that he liked the couch a lot. 1, said the preacher again. Winn-Dixie looked at him kind of hard. Your mama was funny. She could make just about anybody laugh. 2, he said. She had red hair and freckles. Just like me, I said. Just like you, the preacher said. 3, she liked to plant things. She had a talent for it. She could stick a tire in the ground and grow a car. Winn-Dixie started chewing on his paw, and I tapped him on the head to make him stop. 4, said the preacher. She could run fast. If you were racing her, you couldn't ever let her get a head start because she would beat you for sure. I'm that way too, I said. Back home in Watley, I raced Liam Fullerton and I beat him, and he said it wasn't fair because boys and girls shouldn't race each other to begin with. I told him he was just a sore loser. The preacher nodded and he was quiet for a moment. I'm ready for number 5, I told him. 5, he said. She couldn't cook. She burned everything, including water. She had a hard time opening a can of beans. She couldn't make head nor tails of a piece of meat. 6, the preacher rubbed his nose and looked up at the ceiling. Winn-Dixie looked up too. Number 6 is that your mama loved a story. She would sit and listen to stories all day long. She loved to be told a story. She especially liked funny ones, stories that made her laugh. The preacher nodded his head like he was agreeing with himself. What's number 7? I asked. Let's see, he said. She knew all about the constellations, every planet in the nighttime sky, every last one of them. She could name them and point them out, and she never got tired of looking up at them. Number 8, said the preacher with his eyes closed, was that she hated being a preacher's wife. She said she just couldn't stand having the ladies at church judge what she was wearing and what she was cooking and how she was singing. She said it made it feel like a bug under a microscope. Winn-Dixie lay down on the couch. He put his nose in the preacher's lap and his tail in mine. 10, said the preacher. 9, I told him. 9, said the preacher. She drank. She drank beer and whiskey and wine, and sometimes she couldn't stop drinking, and that made me and your mama fight quite a bit. Number 10, he said with a long sigh. Number 10 is that your mama loved you. She loved you very, very much. But she left me, I told him. She left us, the preacher said softly. I could see him pulling his old turtle head back into his stupid turtle shell. She packed her bags and left us, and she didn't leave one thing behind. Okay, I said, and I got up off the couch. Winn-Dixie hopped off too. Thank you for telling me, I said. I went right back to my room and wrote down all 10 things the preacher had told me. I wrote them down just the way he said them to me so that I wouldn't forget them. And then I read them out loud to Winn-Dixie until I had them memorized. I wanted to know those 10 things inside and out. That way, if Mama ever came back, I could recognize her. And I would be able to grab her and hold on to her tight and not let her get away from me ever again. And that is the end of chapter 4.